Good morning. Thank you for coming early morning. On behalf of UN Water Expert Group Water and Climate Change, co-coordinated by UNEC, UNESCO, and WMO, I'm very pleased to welcome you in this very important session, Water for Climate Mitigation, UN Water Analytical Brief on Water for Climate Mitigation. We are going to have a presentation and launch the report. My name is Anil Mishra. I am Chief of Hydrological System, Climate Change and Adaptation, working at UNESCO's Intergovernmental Hydrological Program. As we all know, water is critical component for various climate mitigation measures, but also this pavilion also highlights that water is fundamental to the net zero transition. Many mitigation efforts are reliant on available water for sufficient quality and quantity. We are going to deep dive into this statement. Probably this statement was meant for this our session. So I'm very happy to see this statement. We will try to have this analytical brief presented, have discussed to raise awareness on the critical role of water in climate mitigation effort. As hydrologist, I consider water as a victim because we have floods, droughts, glacier lake outburst floods, but also water provides solution. In terms of water availability, sometimes we have lots of water. Even in river flow, we have 46,000 cubic kilometers of water annually. Humanity use 22% of that. But that doesn't mean water is available when we need it and where we need it. So we have a spatial and temporal problem. How to address that? And how to address for climate mitigation? So the objective of this session is to promote integration of water consideration into NDCs, foster collaboration among UN agencies. We as a co-coordinator of UN Water Expert Water and Climate on behalf of UNESCO, UNEC, and WMO, we very much want to collaborate with you, but also with the member states and identify support mechanism. I'm not going to talk about the report itself. My colleague and co-lead from WMO my colleague Sonia Kapel from UNEC. Sonia is Secretary of Water Convention and Nicola is Head of Global Processes and Policies. They are going to present on behalf of UN Water. And first I would like to invite them to make the presentation within 7 minutes. Sonia and Nicola, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you and good morning, and indeed, thank you for coming on an early Monday morning. So water is really, as you all know, cross-cutting and covers so many other topics such as energy, agriculture, health, education, and many others. And that's why also in the UN system, so many UN agencies work on water. More than 30 UN agencies actually are touching on water issues, and that's why a coordination mechanism was created, namely UN Water, which is not a separate organization, but it's a coordination mechanism between those 30 UN agencies and also many partners, including many of you who are here today, are partners. The focus of UN Water is to support member states to sustainably manage water, including in the context of climate change. Actually just now in July was launched the first UN system-wide strategy on water and sanitation in New York. And just 2 weeks ago in New York, we also decided on a collaborative implementation plan, which has as one of its priority to support mainstreaming of water in global climate processes. And this is happening, among others, through the expert group on climate change and water under UN Water, which is co-coordinated indeed by UNESCO, WMO, and UNEC, myself. And this expert group also includes more than 30 members, mostly UN organizations, but also many partners, including CIWI, AGWA, GWP, and many of you who are here today. And since 2009, the expert group has been created and has had as one of its goals to highlight water in the global climate processes, to also, to some extent, coordinate or at least communicate better about what the different partners and and members of the expert group are doing on water, and also to provide coordinated input, such as, for example, now on the global goal adaptation, where UNICEF, on behalf of the expert group, has provided an input to the discussion on the indicators. But since a few years, we have also started to look at the importance of water for mitigation, not only adaptation. We organized already several side events on this topic at COPs. But then last year, we started actually to look at the figures in order to prove how water is important for climate change mitigation. And IOCA, on behalf of the expert group, prepared a study which Nicholas will present, which we discussed in Bonn last year at international meeting. And then based on this, we elaborated this analytical brief on water for climate mitigation. And I would really like to highlight this was a collaborative effort where many organizations have contributed. You can see them here on the screen. Many organizations, but also individuals. And I would like to say a big thank you to all who have provided comments or inputs. Some of you who are here, but also some who are online and others. And we hope that as a next step now after the launch, also with all these organizations, we can jointly promote the topic, obviously also with the Water Pavilion. And that's great that Water Pavilion is also dedicating today and tomorrow to discussions of this topic. So now I hand over to Nicholas to actually present the analytical brief.
Yes, thank you very much, Sonia, and good morning, everyone, also from my side. And I also, additionally, to all the thanks to the contributions from all partners and individuals, big thanks to Anthony Sletcher, who actually brought it all together into this wonderful report. So as Sonia said, much has been, we know much, or much has been written about the interlinkages between water and climate adaptation and the importance for the NAPS ultimately with the global goal and adaptation. But we really saw a blind spot in the interlinkages between water and climate change. And this analytical brief that we're launching here today, and you hopefully scanned already through the QR code at the beginning, the report that is already online, and you will see it also at the end of the presentation. We really hope that this will be useful for climate policymakers and also the organizations who will be helping countries in implementing climate mitigation measures at the country level. So this is really the first time that we are looking into water as a resource for climate mitigation purposes, and it hopefully will provide this assistance. The report, as Sonia said, is based on a study that we did with the International University Climate Alliance, and this analytical brief draws on that information and also different sources about the amount of water required for a wide range of mitigation measures, from the clean energy measures to carbon dioxide removal to reducing emissions from water and sanitation systems itself. And this study estimated the volumes of water required for different measures at a global aggregate, and they created an index of water climate efficiency, being the amount of water required to achieve the unit of emission reduction, as you can see here. So to put it in other ways, how much climate benefit can be gained from each unit of water. And the brief now discusses this information and how it can be translated into climate action. So in a nutshell, this report says that understanding water availability and constraints can assist in deciding on climate mitigation options and guide the design of climate mitigation projects. So clean energy measures may or may not demand more water than current systems at the local level, depending on the technology and the water availability in the location. Artificial and natural carbon capturing methods to store carbon from in the vegetation or in the soils, such as afforestation or also peatland restoration, will also depend on the system receiving adequate water so that they can actually capture them adequately. But also many systems such as irrigation, reservoirs, sanitation systems can be a major source of methane, as we know, and also other greenhouse gases, which can reduce where we can reduce the emissions. So there can be also co-benefits of climate mitigation measures, and also other benefits such as environmental health or health of the human people itself or economy. What the report says also is the importance of policy alignment, so that water is considered in climate mitigation planning, but also climate opportunities are considered in all water strategic planning. And we have, of course, SDG 6 of the 2030 agenda. So if we work towards achieving SDG 6, this will also help us achieve our climate mitigation goals. But of course, if we work also, as we have now in the Global Goal on Adaptation, the target on water, if we work towards that, we will also make sure that we achieve SDG 6. So this relation has to be recognized, and the policies need to be aligned. And this, of course, will then ultimately reduce project risks, and we will be able to achieve the climate benefit with less water and at a lower cost. So we at UN Water really encourage all countries now to consider this brief as they prepare their NDCs 3.0, and we stand ready as UN Water, and we're closely working together with the countries in helping them take informed decisions. So to conclude, while we were preparing this brief, it really showed us that improved water management and the outcomes really are key to unlocking the promise of the Paris Agreement. And we say that water is a critical part for the climate solution. So if we look after water and we can achieve sustainable water outcomes, then in turn, water can look after us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola and Sonia, for presenting the water analytical brief. And I just highlight 3 key points. The clean energy measures, whether we may or may not need additional water resources, CO2 removal process, water supply, contribution to global goal and adaptation, and then helping country to prepare NDC 3.6 and of course SDG 6. So with that, we will go to now panel discussion to deep dive into the analytical brief. I would like to invite here our distinguished panelist, Mr. Mark Howell, Program Director, Climate Compatible Growth. Mark. I would also like to invite Mr. Zerker Tamelander, Director of Science and Policy, Ramsar. Zerker. And our panelist, Dr. Amgad El Mahidi, Regional Manager for MENA Region Global Climate Fund. And we have virtual panelist, Mr. Thomas Bredoriel, Energy and Environmental Policy Analyst, International Energy Agency. He apologized, but he presented his video. We will play his video later on. So our distinguished panelists, you have probably looked at the water analytical brief. I know some of you provided a very significant contribution, and thank you so much for that. And we really appreciate your contribution, but we would like to have your views so that we can go to the audience afterward. I would like to start with Mr. Mark Howell. Do you think NDC cannot be implemented because there is not enough water in the right place for them? Because as I highlighted, we have water, but spatial and temporal variation remains. And will that mean that Paris Agreement will fail? Could you please highlight your reflection within 4 minutes, please, sir?
Sure. Thank you very much indeed. So my name is Mark Howells. I'm an academic from Imperial College London, run something called the Climate Compatible Growth Programme, which is a £95 million research programme run with Cambridge, Oxford, UCL, Imperial, KTH, and the Open University, as well as Loughborough University. In answer to your question, very quickly, can we meet the NDCs without taking into account water properly? No, obviously. It's the case that a number of technical organizations and governments are starting to develop integrated tools to allow you to look at the energy system, land use system, water system, all at the same time to try and respond to climate stress and come up with integrated mitigation efforts. So there's a tool called CLUES, short for Climate, Land, Energy, Water, which takes into account a lot of these interlinkages, and it's wonderful that there's an increasing body of knowledge that's available here. The genesis of this comes from a very useful story. We were working with the government of Mauritius, who wanted to increase the use of biofuels. They wanted to increase the use of biofuels so they could import less gasoline, improve energy security, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It was also economic. So this is something that, from a normal mitigation-only lens, made a lot of sense. However, we developed a hydrological model of the island. You'll be happy to know, I'm sure. We ran lots of different climate scenarios through the island with this mitigation measure. And what we found was that the water requirements, and it was in that slide quite nicely, for biofuel as well as afforestation, are really quite high. So if the island wants to be able to produce the biofuel it wanted to, there ended up in many scenarios, many climate futures, being a water scarcity problem. To address the water scarcity problem, one of the best things you can do, and Mauritius is in fact doing this already, is increasing the amount of desalination that is required. Desalination is incredibly energy intensive. So when we run these scenarios through, what we find is, looking at mitigation by itself, things look great, but you're at risk of creating severe stress. If you adapt to that stress in the fastest way you can, you desalinate water using increased coal generation. That means instead of importing less fuel, you import more fuel because you have to import coal to do this. Instead of reducing emissions, you increase emissions because you're running with coal. And the economics of the whole system falls apart because the desalination and coal imports and so on is really expensive. It was a really good example and one of the reasons why this CLUES model started to get developed. The flip side to that is we need to look at adaptation for sure, and much has been written on adaptation. We need to look at mitigation, and this conversation is incredibly important in that respect. However, looking at mitigation and adaptation together can create very, very interesting synergies. In the case of Mauritius, doing the desalination with renewables allowed you to store water rather than electricity. Often with renewables like solar, you need batteries. Batteries are expensive, it increases the price of electricity. But if you desalinate water and you store water instead of storing electricity, that turns out to be extremely cheap. So it's possible to not only increase the amount of renewable energy, but also increase your water supply and do it in a cost-effective way, mitigating and adapting at the same time. The potential is really important. And it also is critically important for things like the GCF, where quite often we think only in terms of adaptation or mitigation, but we can think of both. And water creates this really important strategic link between the two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howell. I think you very much eloquently highlighted water roles in both adaptation and mitigation and also synergies. And the example that you presented, hydrological model, we really need science-based assessment. And this is something that we need to highlight. I would like to move on to Ramsar. Mr. Jerker Tamelander, Ramsar has been working a lot on the nature-based solution and other effort. Clean energy measures may or may not demand more water than old energy at local level. How do you want to reflect based on Ramsar perspective? That is the statement that came from Analytical Brief. If you could highlight to the audience. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. Of course, we're very happy to have been part of preparing this important brief. I think it's, as has already been said, but it's really critical to start thinking differently about water in the context of mitigation. Restating what you already said or what Nicholas said before, the different mitigation pathways do have water requirements. They do have water needs that we need to pay much closer attention to. And part of the reason why we need to do that is that we have actually pushed the world's hydrological cycle quite far out of balance. And so we have built a system which is perhaps used to utilizing water in a certain way, and we will see that increasingly changing, so that the water that may have always been available in a certain location that we take for granted is no longer there. And especially if we're talking about then mitigation options that have very significant water needs, we need to, as you just said, really have the science there to tell us, is this actually viable? Like, is it truly viable? And I think that's something this brief is starting to shine a light on. You know, the Convention on Wetlands, of course, the Ramsar Convention, it's a global instrument that focuses specifically on water-related ecosystems. So the natural basis for providing us with water. In fact, almost all the water humanity uses is drawn directly or indirectly from wetlands. And it's not just that it is water that you can draw out in a lake or from a river. It is the water that sits inside the ecosystem, in the soil, in the plants, and so on. And that drives the hydrological cycle. And that means when we degrade those systems, we also contribute to pushing the hydrological cycle further out of balance. So we have this conundrum of seeing climate change shifting the hydrological cycle, but equally we have ecosystem degradation, change, conversion that also does the same thing. And so the two conspire against us, making adaptation more of a challenge and mitigation more of a challenge. And this is absolutely critical. And from our side, one of the most important things we need to focus on is better wetland inventory. We need to understand these systems and actually have them properly inventorized, delineated. Where are they? How big are they? And on that basis, we can start thinking about how we deal with their water services. On that basis, all those adaptation and mitigation benefits will come to fruition, because as was just said, I think with wetlands in particular, you have an amazing amount of mitigation and adaptation outcomes if you treat them well. Conversely, you leave society very, very vulnerable if you don't. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your statement about out of balance hydrological cycle, we live in the era of what we call in the hydrological perspective, stationarity is dead. Past is no longer to future. So, and also there was a paper which highlighted the 46,000 cubic kilometer water is available from the runoff. And humanity is using 22%, but that doesn't mean we have plenty of water when we need it and where we need it. So this inventory of wetland is very important, and keeping hydrological balance. I want to move on to Green Climate Fund, which also contributed tremendously to Analytical brief. So from GCF perspective, what is the importance of this briefing in line with NDCs in the next NDC submission, and how GCF see where water can strengthen NDCs? Dr. Amgad Ilmandik, if you could highlight in 4 minutes, please.
Sure. Thanks, Anil, for that. So I think like that session or that briefing, it's really highlight that strategic link between water and climate mitigation. And it's a very critical as we approaching really like the new NDCs next year. By June next year, all countries need to submit their voluntary or NDCs targets. And that really align with our, the way we see water as a strategic component in the integrated climate actions. And I wanted to dive deep, like what this really brief telling us, there is a clear demand for water to be able to achieve the climate mitigation actions. And that really align with our investment strategy, or as we call it, like water sector guide, where we have defined a clear pathways for the paradigm shift, one for adaptation and one for mitigations. And I totally agree with you, Mark, when you say like the co-benefits. So when we inviting project or co-designing project, or we see a project that being submitted to us, we try to look at what are really the co-benefits here. What is the mitigation opportunities here? And what could be really like the negative impact of that adaptation or mitigation actions as well. I think it's, before I go for like my last statement, but I want to just to highlight how really water can strengthen the NDCs. I can see it from really three perspectives from GCF as like a Green Climate Fund or the largest multilateral fund for climate actions. One is really the capacity building. we have already a mainstream that really come with 10 million envelope for the countries to help the countries to define their national adaptation plan, developing their NDCs, and also do the capacity building for institutions, and also like policy and institutional framework. And this where the link for water, like how we asking the country really to use that money to look at the tools that can actually use to be monitored and evaluate their water availability, capacity, and also for mitigation options. The second, water really is the help with that cross coordination between different sectors, because water is really the connectors between all sectors. So I see again the role for water under the project development or project design or even the national adaptation plan that really help to bring that coordination between all sectors and cross-cutting discussions as well. And that's how GCF really, again, inviting like the inclusive mitigation project or cross-cutting project like Nexus project where we can see adaptation and mitigations benefits. The last point, which is really finance, which is really linked to us. And that like finance need to be accessible, adaptable, and tailored to the country's need and priorities. And if I speak about the region I am representative as a regional manager for MENA, it's the most water scarcity region. And water really play a critical role for food security, for ecosystem, for energy, and so on. So we see like, unfortunately, the project that really now coming in the water sector in that region, it's a green hydrogen. And when you look at the green hydrogen, they have to use water. And unfortunately, it's coming from the most water scarce region. And that's why? Because it's a business model. Like you have a clear off-taker that's happy to pay any price. But the countries, because they're already under debts, they don't really think about the water impact. They see it from like financial viable projects. Yes, if I create a green hydrogen, I know the buyer will pay whatever price. I don't care about the impact. So I think we really need to think, as we start talking about maladaptation, what could be also the mal mitigation aspect here? I think that's the message I wanted to close with. We really need to take that message very loud and clear. There is an opportunity we can actually create mal mitigation as we create maladaptation sometime when we go for like solar power irrigation for groundwater. If it doesn't come with a clear enabling environment, clear regulatory framework, it creates that maladaptation aspect. So also for mitigation, we really need to consider that aspect as well. Thank you.
Excellent. We need to address maladaptation, but also the 3 points that you highlighted: capacity building, water is a connector. You know, I just reflected. There was a discussion among the youth, and they were asked to put SDGs in a way to give the message which of the SDG, if you take out, everything will fail. And they all came together, SDG 6. Water is the connector. That's what exactly highlighted. So with that, we will go to our virtual participant, Mr. Thomas Bredor from Energy and Environmental Policy for his video message. Can you put video, please?
Thank you for inviting us to this event on water for climate mitigation. I want to make 3 points during this presentation. First, the interdependence of water and energy is set to intensify in the coming years, and climate change is adding to energy and water pressures. Second one is that a shift to clean energy has the potential to ease the energy sector's water needs. But not all low-carbon technologies have low water requirements. And the third is that integrated water energy planning can build on synergies, inform climate action, and mitigate future risks. So let's start with the first point. Water and energy face rising demand and growing constraints in many regions because of economic and population growth, as well as climate change. This has significant implications for ensuring both energy and water security. Changing climate patterns are already putting stress on infrastructure that depends on hydrological conditions or adequate water supplies, such as hydropower plants or thermal power plants that use fresh water for cooling. And as you can see here, the share of energy infrastructure in high water stress areas is set to increase as climate change intensifies. Now let's move to the second point. And it's really not only the power sector that needs to contend with water scarcity. The risks from water stress span the entire energy system. Coal mines use water to control emissions, oil and gas operations employ water to increase production, biofuels depend on irrigation, refineries use water for cooling, and the list goes on. If we look at the scenario under current policy settings, energy's thirst for water continues to increase. Meanwhile, the water system's energy needs are posed to rise to support new water transportation and treatment projects. Now, if we look at a scenario that is Paris-aligned, water use in the energy sector declines as wind and solar PV start to replace fossil fuels in the power sector, and gains in energy efficiency limit energy demand growth. Now, as I mentioned, not all low-carbon technologies have low water requirements. Some examples include nuclear power that you see there increases its water withdrawal, electrolytic hydrogen production, which increases water consumption, as well as other technologies like carbon capture and storage, or the supply of critical minerals that is required for several clean energy technologies, including batteries. And my final point is that policymakers have a key role to play in enhancing the resilience of water and energy systems to climate change. The upcoming round of updates to nationally determined contributions offers a window of opportunity to integrate water planning and climate strategies and support secure energy transitions. There are several potential synergies available, some of those listed here on the screen. The takeaway is really that energy and water stewardship should go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. With that, the key message that I just gathered from his video presentation, low carbon technology might be also water intensive. He gave example of nuclear energy. The share of energy supply in infrastructure in high water stress area is set to increase. So with that, we would like to have some interactive discussion about this analytical brief, but also based on this statement. Floor is open. Please ask your question, identify yourself, and I'll come with the mic. Any question? No question from the... I see you wanted to ask something.
Thank you. And thanks, panelists. I'm Henk Ovink, Executive Director of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. Couldn't agree more with your position on the importance of water, the hydrological cycle, its stability and security for the current and coming transitions. The question is how. So if we all agree on the fact that without a stabilized hydrological cycle and water in place, there's no way we can achieve mitigation or adaptation goals. And Dirk already mentioned part of that, the focus on wetlands, but I'd like to hear from the whole panel, what are pathways forwards that would get us on track?
So what are the pathways? Who starts?
I'm happy to continue. I sort of started and I'm happy to continue. Thanks, Henk. I think how is we need to use the information we already have a lot better than we do. So peatland has been mentioned many times, including in this analytical brief. It's probably the strongest nature-based mitigation system we have. And it's widespread. It's not an enormous global area, but it's occurring in more than 100, maybe 120 countries. This data may be slightly old, but I think it's in the range of 13% of countries that have peatlands that have actually included peatlands actions in their NDCs. So there's a very big gap between knowledge and between action in NDCs. So one thing is how. Get on with it on the basis of the information that we have. Second point on that is making more of the synergies between conventions. We have the same parties in all of the conventions. You know, it's the 3 Rio conventions as well as ours, as well as the Water Convention. And so, you know, how do they look at how do parties consider their treaty obligations and find the ways in which they can deliver on several of their obligations, but then also achieving significant results. And again, nature-based solutions is one of those things. And I think there's a huge strain on all of us with the 3 Rio conventions got back to back, but there's opportunity in that, in tying them together. And many of us were in Cali recently. We're here now. We're looking forward to Riyadh and to looking at water and ecosystems in a land degradation context. And the Convention on Wetlands COP happens in July in Victoria Falls next year. And so we as a community and parties certainly have that opportunity to use it more. My last point is, of course, but my last point would be, one of the things that needs to happen is increased focus on use efficiency. I think we've all spoken about it, but I assume that there is gains to be had and actual achievements to be had in improving use efficiency, incentivizing enhanced water use efficiency, and maybe penalizing poor water use efficiency in a way, so that it drives further effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
No, thanks very much. And I think the urgency is there. I was doing some work recently in Jordan, and it was really interesting. The city of Amman was had these projections for how much water it needed to pump and desalinate to get into place in order to meet the water needs. However, the energy ministry, when they calculated the numbers, had no idea what that implied in terms of energy production. It was massive. And just making these really simple link-ups was incredibly important. It was exacerbated by the fact that something like 30-40% of the water was just lost because the water system was poorly managed. So you could have avoided all of the extra energy and other things by having a better managed system and greater water efficiency. I want to pick up the points about capacity building though, and I think this is really important. This field there's a lot of information that needs to be gathered really quickly. One of the things that we're working on is, and if you go to climatecompatiblegrowth.com, there's some online courses there on this climate, land, energy, water use tool, together with a number of agencies. This is being adopted by several countries to have a look at their NDCs and so on. It's far from perfect, and there are lots of other great tools and efforts out there. It's quite similar to, if you're familiar with the UNECE under the Water Convention, did something on Trans-River Boundary Nexus work, which I think was trying to unpack the same kinds of things. But we're working with universities across the world to build capacity in country, because another thing that's been alluded to is that the solutions are very specific to country and country needs. Therefore, the need to increase capacity in countries to be able to inform our own governments is really urgent. Water, I think, more than many other things, is a bottom-up thing. And so the importance of building capacity in country, I think, is critical. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You highlighted the importance of efficiency, and I think in terms of water distribution system, the Singapore is a best example where among all the countries, it has a very efficient water supply system, so it minimizes use of energy. But we go to Amkat. You want to come in?
Thanks, Hank, for that. I totally agree with what has been said. But again, take it from GCF perspective here. So capacity building, yes. But before I talk about the capacity building, I think every one of us has a clear role to play, but we are not really coordinating between us as well. So like we have academia that bring tools, data, and so on. And we have like conventions, we have researchers, we have funds, we have NGOs, like everyone. But we are not really in a coordinated way to really support countries. When we work with the countries, we have a different mechanism in the way we engage with them. And we require them really to develop their NDCs, but also to bring that NDCs to be an investable NDCs. Plus, they need to also to put like a climate investment or a country program. Like in the last week, we have launched like 2 country programs, one in Iraq, one in Yemen. And if you look at the priorities, desalination in Yemen is #1 priority. If you look in Iraq, Again, desalination, wastewater reuse, it's again top priorities, plus of course energy transition. So how we can really support countries through the building capacity to be decided or able to think about indices and develop indices to be an investable and turn it into an actions. And finance it's not the issue because we, like for each country, we have 10 million for that capacity building. And that's more than enough for them to be able really to bring that knowledge and build that institutional capacity. Unfortunately, when we interact with the countries, they don't understand what climate finance. They don't understand really indices, what does it mean. It's just I put a target, but I need to be careful because I need to report every 2 years. So they don't really think about how I can turn those indices into investable. I think we have a role to play. We have a role to educate them, to build their capacity. Finance is there, and we can turn those indices to become a project that's also funded by GCF. And we have a clear project that really invite mitigation project or inclusive mitigation project or cross-cutting project between adaptation and mitigation. I think it's really capacity building within the country. The starting point, it's really with the countries. We really need to talk to the countries, educate them, build their capacity, ensure they are developing the right indices. It will be submitted in June. We don't really have enough time, but we really need to fully actively engage with them and direct them in that role. This is how we can turn it into investable actions, and this is how we can really make impact in the next 4 to 6 years.
Thank you. In fact, highlighting capacity building and also GCF's all these guidelines and capacity building is very much appreciated. So you have 1 minute to come back.
Just one follow-up. If this is bringing it so together, 5 conventions, the linkages between water and mitigation and adaptation, capacity, both individually across sectors, but also institutionally, and the opportunity to take action in policy, programs, projects, and financing, then the next UN 2026 Water Conference should be focusing on this. And that's the only thing, right? Because that is
Totally
where
agree.
we, after these 3 Rio conventions this year, the Ramsar Convention next year, all these COPs, we can bring it together. So if there is we have 2 years to make this work. So why don't we do it?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much. We are running out of time, but thank you for bringing agenda for the next UN Water Conference. I will take final question and then QR.
Hello, I'm Professor Michael Skoulos. I'm the Global Water Partnership Chair of Mediterranean. Thank you first of all for all what it was said. I go directly to the key question for me is how we can bring in the ecosystems in the Nexus. I had the opportunity in Ramsar Convention in 2012 to add in the Nexus the ecosystems. And I believe that this is one of the major problems also for capacity building at national level. And this is the most difficult to link it also with the economics, if you can make any comment on that.
Thank you very much. We are running out of time, but maybe if you can respond in 30 seconds.
Yeah, just a last message. I totally agree. Like the water conference, it's a point like we don't really need to miss, but we really need to plan ahead. We really need to start today. So I'm actually having a meeting with Minister of Foreign Affairs in Emirates today, and that's the message I'm actually taking with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think those 2 last questions, comments from the floor actually connect very well. For the water conference, I think a big shift that can be made is this consideration of how the natural systems sustain our uses. And we need to bring the nature and water sectors. We have done a lot in bringing them together. More can be done. And I think, your report, the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, has actually also really contributed in that regard. And it will help us weave that narrative. And in terms of the economics, I think one more thing to mention here is that we are currently preparing the next iteration of the Global Wetlands Outlook. And that has a focus on the economic benefits to society, but also what are the current and projected economic losses to society based on current wetland degradation trends. And I think that should also hopefully give us some additional layers of narrative and evidence to tie things together.
Thank you very much. With that, I would like to invite my colleague Sonia. Would you like to give a final statement?
Very, very quick.
Very quick.
This is super exciting. In the energy and transport space, we've been working on a process called Data to Deal to help ministries talk to each other, understand how to decipher that into cost-benefit analysis to go and get finance. I think extending that to water and land use systems in a structured, sensible way might just be a really useful extension. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll continue discussion, but I would like to invite my colleague and co-lead of UN Water Expert Group, Water and Climate Change, to provide concluding remarks. Sonia.
Thank you very much. And obviously we would need much more time to discuss this topic, but luckily discussion will actually continue later here today and also in the next few days. For example, tomorrow on the Water Day, there will be a COP Presidency Nexus event at 5 o'clock tomorrow. There will also be, which we are involved in, there will be also a official side event a bit on that topic, I think on the 20th at 6:30, if I'm not mistaken. And there will also be the 2 official COP Presidency Water events on the 21st at 9 and at 11 o'clock, where this discussion will also continue. And much more, many other events. So you're all invited to these different events. Now, just a few conclusions. I mean, I think I've been looking at some NDCs over the last few days, and you can find water in a number of them. Not yet enough, but most of the time it's about adaptation. I think less than 15% actually also link mitigation aspects. And if they do, it's mostly about like emissions from wastewater or so, but never taking such a holistic picture like we now have been looking. So this really shows the need for action, because otherwise we exactly risk, as you said, to have actually mal-mitigation and maladaptation. So water really, as it was said here, provides the link between the two and needs to be included not only in adaptation discussions here, but also in the mitigation discussions. However, we need more science, we need more assessments. We have seen the study which was shown at the beginning, but actually that study still has many uncertainties and calls for more research, including by IPCC, but also at global level, but also at national, at basin, at local level. As we have heard, actually in specific situation, a different modeling solution can help countries and governments to take decision on the way forward. As already said, I think going forward it's really needed to include these issues into the NDC 3.0. And we as under UN Water, we're engaged in and ready to support countries in this regard by supporting the baseline assessments, by engaging with governments, by working also with the resident coordinators and the UNDP, who are engaged in many countries in these aspects. But obviously many other actors are also engaged, like some of you who are here. I would like to bring, however, one other aspect, which is also the usefulness of indeed integration. On the one hand, we heard about between different MEAs, between the 3 Rio Convention, but beyond that also including the Ramsar Convention and the Water Convention, where we actually just had our 10th meeting of the parties 2 weeks ago in Slovenia. And the high-level segment was exactly focused on water, climate change and transboundary cooperation. So it looked not only how water can support adaptation, but also mitigation, and that how also regional and transboundary cooperation in this regard can actually support, because in a basin it may be sometimes more efficient that if you have a certain mitigation measure in another country in the basin, so regional cooperation both on adaptation and mitigation can actually increase efficiency and effectiveness, and can actually help to prevent maladaptation and malmitigation, as we've just been saying. So that's another call, that even while countries are focused on the national level with the NDCs, I really would like to encourage also looking beyond that at regional level and at basin level, especially including transboundary basin level, because that can can actually bring efficiency and increase effectiveness. And at the same time have many co-benefits, including, for example, for peace, for regional integration, and beyond that. So with this, once again, I thank you for attending this event. Thank you to the co-organizers, thank you to the speakers, thank you also to the audience online. I invite you to read indeed the policy brief, which was mostly drafted by indeed Tony Slater, and I encourage you to further engage with us as UN Water Expert Group as we continue to support countries in actually implementing some of the recommendations which are included in the policy brief and which we have been discussing here today. So thank you and have a good day. Photo.
We will have a photo with the panelists. Can you come?